live from Brussels and Mumbai. It's ZN Live.
ZN Live.
ZN Live, that's right. Today, we're very excited. We have a very special guest, Florence Ranson. She has extensive experience in communication. She's been working as the head of communication for the Banking Federation. She's also been heading communications for Food Drinks Europe, and she's been moderating events, doing consulting, and a number of other activities. Very, very happy to have you here today, Florence. And I want to start with one question. You're involved in events and moderation. How has your work changed with COVID? And how has been the transition to digital or hybrid events?
Thanks, Phil. Hi, everybody, and delighted to be here. It's actually a pleasure to be joining you today. Clearly, yes, moderation and events in general took a full stop for the first couple of months of COVID, and then very, very quickly moved on to online. In terms of moderation, I think that in the beginning, most organizations felt that since this was going to be temporary, they could do it themselves in-house with a colleague or something, and then realize quite rapidly, actually, that they still needed professional moderation for all sorts of reasons. Moderators adapted for a year and a half, more or less. I did, and I think most moderators did, only online events, moved back to hybrid events, but even hybrid were a particular sort of hybrid where we were, like, for instance, in a studio with no audience, but we had a tech team and a studio, so that was the hybrid, the in-person part, and then all the audience and all the speakers, or most of the speakers, were online. Since last year, since the beginning of this year, big shift back to presential, big shift. But all the presential events have retained this hybrid dimension. There's always a hybrid dimension, and people expect it now. People expect to be able to connect to events from wherever they are, for all sorts of reasons, not just COVID, but, you know, transportation, flights, time, and so on.
Now, if you look at your crystal ball, it's almost 2023. What do you think is going to happen? Because we know in Brussels, people were desperate to go back to presentials. They wanted to have face-to-face events, but now we're facing a recession, energy crisis, people less likely to fly. So what do you think is going to happen to this world? Are they going to do their big events with champagne and snacks, especially in the light of the corruption scandal, which is not helping the perception of these events? What do you think is going to happen in 2023?
First of all, I think the lavish kind of events you're talking about were actually never the events of the institutions, or rarely. The more events of associations and so on, for whom it was also a way of bringing in stakeholders and thanking people. So I think in that sense, that's maybe not going to change. But I see that we're going to keep that hybrid dimension. Probably more, as you said, because of the energy crisis, because of budgets, because a lot of organizations do not have the budgets to send their people traveling across Europe, but also across the world. I was last week moderating an event where there were people from 4 continents represented, but they'd all been flown in because it was part of the Commission's project. These people would never have been able to fly in with their own budgets. So maybe that type of thing is going to continue. It's extremely important, however, that people meet in person, because the networking, as we all know, is absolutely essential to a lot of people's work. I mean, that really is what generates future projects, what generates connections. Doing it all online is still very frustrating. So that's why as soon as it was possible to go back to presential, people did. But I think we're going to keep that hybrid dimension and maybe have less presential events, but one a year where everybody can get together, providing, of course, that COVID situation doesn't get worse.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, we're seeing a lot of mutations. But talking about these events for association, Leora was at a keynote that she delivered to the BIAF, so the Global Association of Associations. and Mira, you did a workshop on events actually. So what was your takeaway from what people were saying there? Were they telling you a sense of where they were moving?
So the main reason that I was there was because people, especially associations, nonprofits, especially associations, have yearly events, conferences. So that's one of the main things that they do, is get together, and that's really important for them. But they are not utilizing digital social media as well as they could, and they were realizing that and they weren't getting as much traction anymore with their sort of more traditional ways of getting people to sign up. And so they were wondering how to improve that, and also how to get more visibility using social media, for example. So that's what we were discussing, and they realized after this session specifically that there are really big steps to take. And so yeah, so that was what the session was about, including very tactical things like the fear of missing out, for example, using scarcity, some of the principles, because very often when you have an event, you are tempted to say, okay, this is happening and here is all the information, now please sign up. But that's not you need to play with these principles of, here's a little bit of information, you're going to find out more on Friday, and then you need to release the information step by step, making people feel interested every step of the way. Also making it worthwhile to sign up early, and then having something every step of the way. And very often these are paid events, so you need to also explain why people should pay, what's in it for them, and so those are some of the things we spoke about.
Yeah, and I think one of the themes that I've been seeing in some of the events. So you were in person. I was actually online the week before at the Public Affairs Council for the EU Digital Days. And one of the things people are talking about a lot is training. We need new skills, and I think Florence, you talk about hybrid events. It requires a different type of moderation. Now, how much importance are people giving to training in 2023, and has it kind of shifted in importance in terms of what people are focused on now?
Training is still a very difficult thing to handle for a lot of organizations, because they, first of all, often they do not see what needs their staff, their teams have. And if you ask people, what would you like to be trained in? Often they don't really know. The heads of organizations, whether they're private or associations or whatever, often think that training is more of a gratification than a necessity for their teams. And as long as that doesn't change, I think that it's still going to be difficult to train teams in the way they should be trained. What changes? What do we need to train people in? I think we need, yes, digital skills, simply because digital skills are not the prerogative of communications teams. They shouldn't be, but they should be led by the communications teams, so that the messages are coherent, so that there's a line of communication and everybody sticks to it. But I think that requires training. I think that people should be trained in speaking on camera. It is different from speaking in public. A lot of things are common to the two approaches, of course, but I think speaking on camera, particularly if it is delivering a keynote or something, that's an important one. And my third recommendation would be to help people be ready for any catastrophe, any crisis that can happen. Crisis preparedness, and it doesn't have to be a catastrophe in terms of what you produce, or no, it can be crisis preparedness in terms of you have prepared a big in-person event or a big hybrid event, and then all of a sudden you cannot hold it for all sorts of reasons. There's a new COVID outburst, And then all of a sudden your event has to become all online. Be prepared for that. Be prepared to communicate on that. Be prepared. So all these things are crises. And that is something that we tend to overlook quite a bit in organizations. So these would be my three trends in terms of training needs.
Yeah, and we're here. I think that people, uncertainty creates a need for new skills. And what we've experienced with COVID and then a succession of crises. And, we believe actually that we've reached the point where crisis is almost a permanent state that we're in. Another event comes up and it's, defining a new way of doing things, but it just keeps happening. So at some point you have to say, okay, this is no longer an incredible event. This is just part of the kind of things that we have to do. Now, to deal with that, we need different skills, whether they're in terms of crisis management, as you said, or in terms of how to monitor that kind of crisis unfolding online, or how to react and communicate to that. Do you see associations and clients prioritizing this as more important next year? I mean, have they, because you said that they don't fully recognize this, but do you think they're going to start putting this as a priority next year?
I don't know if they're going to put it as a priority next year. I think there's a shift, there's progress made, but it's very gradual. And I think the progress is made very often under the impulse of teams, because the teams are the ones who, in the case of associations, for instance, because I work for some associations, in the case of associations, you will have working groups in which you have members and people from the private sector, people from other associations and so on, and they will be the ones to discuss the potential crises. And it's for that person within the organization responsible for that working group to bring it back to the management of the organization and say, we need to have something about this. We need to be prepared in case this happens, or just in case something happens. I mean, it's sometimes very difficult to define what a crisis could be about. But so I think under pressure from the teams, the organizations are gradually shifting, but maybe not fast enough.
And Leora, in your conversations with BIF, were you seeing any specific training needs emerging from the associations you spoke with?
Yes, BIF is actually all about training. That's their unique selling point, if you like, their USP. So they're all about providing those training, that they're a training platform for the association, and so they're already developing a whole bunch of new trainings for January and the rest of the year. And I believe digital will be one of them. And so we'll continue that conversation with them as ZN. And they're doing it on all sorts of fronts, also financial and everything that an association needs. From my point of view, when I gave the first keynote and then the workshop, that made them realize that they really want to continue on that front as well. So how do we use digital tools? What can we do to make it more strategic? How can we make sure that we communicate? How do we choose the right channels? It's from the basic to the more advanced. So we'll be continuing that conversation at the end of January at their next training sessions.
If I may, Leora, I think you touched upon a very important point. It's how to make digital communication strategic. It's always been, until now, a bit of a plus, a bit of on the side, a bit of like, oh yeah, let's do that, but without the strategic approach. A bit like communications in general, it has to be part of the strategy from day one. It isn't, let's devise a position or let's devise a project and then give it to the comms team and say to the comms team, here, communicate on that. And then the comms team says, let's add a digital side to our communications. It cannot be like that. It has to be more inclusive from the very inception of a project, a position, or whatever. The comms team has to be part of it from the start, and as part of that comms team's approach, there has to be a digital dimension, which must be understood by the management at the highest level from day one.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the key is to have a strategic perspective on all these things. What are you trying to achieve? What are the ways you're going to achieve that? and how do you deploy those different things. And surprisingly enough, this is not always something that people do in a method, with a clear structure. Now, if you were talking to people who are just joining the communication field, the policy field, what would be your advice to them? What do you think they should be looking to do? How can they prepare themselves for an exciting career in the EU bubble?
I'd say, first of all, never take anything for granted. What you've learned is probably going to give you a sound basis, but it's not going to prepare you for all the challenges you're going to meet. It's especially relevant. I mean, it's relevant in any career, but it's especially relevant in Brussels, because I think the learning curve can be quite steep. And you need to keep your ears and eyes open all the time. Try and find mentors, people who've been around for a while. Of course, they will not have the same approach as you will. And in many cases, those of us who've been around for a while, and I'm talking about myself including, have or may be set in our ways of seeing things, but there's still something to learn from us. The same as we have to be very open to learn from the younger generation, whether in terms of digital communication or many other things. So I think there has to be an interaction there. Maybe be prepared for a degree of frustration in the beginning, because you will not be able to change things just overnight. It takes time. Find allies. If you're in an organization where you feel that your work isn't recognized, then find allies amongst your colleagues. Of course, you need to show your worth. We all need to do that when we start in a new organization, no matter how experienced we are. But you need to explain to your colleagues what it is you do and how you do it, and make suggestions. And so, gain allies so that you can prove your worth. And if possible, put in place some measurement of what you do. In terms of communications, I think that social media, digital communications has made it easier to have measurement, because you can say, oh, we evolved from, 100 followers on Twitter to 2,000 in 2 years. That's very good, and statistically, and so on and so on. That kind of thing you can prove. Measuring communications or the impact of public affairs is very, very difficult. So try and find a few measurements that you can implement in your organization so that you can prove the value of what you have done.
Yeah, I think these are very, very good tips. And I think also, bringing your unique perspective. If you know certain channels that your organization doesn't know, you might check them out and see if you can bring some new ideas to the table. Talking about that, actually, we're going to have an Instagram live after this. We're going to talk about ZN Life and what learning skills. So we're going to come back to that in a minute. But first, we have some recommendations, and there you can talk more about the Instagram live. So first, Florence, for your recommendations.
I try to keep up to speed on communications topics and so on, more through articles than I do through books. So and I'm going to preach from my own parish, and I apologize for that. I'm not involved in the EACD anymore. I'm only a simple member now, but I was one of the founding members. And in terms of communications, exchanges, best practices, learning from one another, it's proved to be a very valuable source. Exchanging with peers, no matter how high these people are. And, I was always amazed to see how very high-ranking people would have the same preoccupations as I would at the level of a European association. So I think it's important to network, to exchange with peers, whether it's through the EACD or any other organization of the kind. But to, in terms of public affairs, I can think of a CEAP, for instance, or in Brussels, or, organizations of that kind. Share your frustrations, debate, exchange, share your best practices. I think that's really essential. And on a completely different front, but just as something that sprang to mind because we were talking about more private types of recommendations and things like books and series. The place of women in society. If you haven't watched The Handmaid's Tale, do. If you haven't read it, it's only 2 books. It's a long series with several seasons, but if you want to read it, the original books by Margaret Atwood, please do. And that's not only for women; it's also very important for men to read it. So that would be a good idea for a last-minute Christmas present.
Excellent. So I actually started the series Handmaid's Tale. So Liara, you have a recommendation, but also you're going to tell us more about the Instagram Live.
Yes, let me start with my recommendation. I know I always tell you about podcasts and music, but today, we are about to go into, most of us, into some sort of break for Christmas, for Hanukkah, for some sort of New Year celebration. So, and many of us go to Christmas markets, but I would like to recommend something sort of related. Go to the Netherlands and go ice skating. You know that all Dutch people love ice skating, specifically outdoors. As soon as it starts freezing, we start dreaming about what we call the Elfstedentocht, which is a outdoor ice skating tour between 11 towns. Okay, 11 cities. They're not really cities in the north of the country. We haven't had one, I think, for over a decade, because it has to freeze for a longer period of time for us to be able to do that. Everyone was already ice skating last week when it was freezing outdoors on the canals, on the little ponds, but it's now not possible anymore. But that doesn't mean you can go ice skating. There are all these beautiful places. You can go in front of the Rijksmuseum, that's a museum square, where also the Van Gogh or Van Gogh Museum is. You can go in Rotterdam. There's a beautiful place. I already booked my ticket for my family with my kids and my sister in The Hague. So there are all these beautiful places. You don't have to own a pair of skates like every Dutch person does, but you can just rent them. And then you can just have a day of fun. We will be annoyed with you because Dutch people know how to ice skate, and then you come as a tourist and you fall and you don't know. But you can learn, we'll help you, and then you can have some hot chocolate, and it's a true winter experience, and you'll enjoy it a lot, I promise. So ice skating for the winter. And then, yes, Instagram Live. We are going live at 3:00. And why are we going live? Because we had our own giveaway prize thing going on, because Phil, the amazing Phil that you see here in our screen, developed this really cool course about branding and how to become the ambassador of your own channel, all the things you need to learn. It's a really, really good course remind me who developed it for us, Phil.
Domestika.
And it's really good. It's not for free, but we decided to buy it for the students or for whoever wants to win it. There were many students who are interested in winning it, and then give it for free to them and 2 of their friends, so they could then discuss it and all become better at this very important life, because part of life, because we all know that in this day and age, if you're not very good at this, at branding, at your LinkedIn, at all the parts of your online reality, it's more difficult to find a job. It helps with all parts of your professional life, especially as a communicator and a marketeer, of course. So today, very shortly, we're going to announce who won that amazing prize. So that's today at 3 on Instagram Live.
So very excited to see you ice skating. Looking forward to seeing the pictures and videos there of your.
I did it last year, and we had lots of videos. So
I want to see it. This is good. Another ice skating competition, maybe another idea. My recommendation, actually, on a completely different topic, is a book called Borderless by Namrata Pudar, and it's actually the story of someone who grew up in India, travels to the US, and basically it's a kind of identity story. Indians looking at the US, and Indians who live in the US, how they look back at India and all the conversations. It's a lot of fun. You can recognize it if you know Indian culture. And it was a nice book. I enjoyed reading it. So something if you want a different perspective on things. So I believe that's all we have time for. Now, I want to say thank you so much, Florence, for joining us. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, happy celebrations, and enjoy the weekend. And for those who will join us on Instagram, see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merry
Bye-bye,
Christmas.
everybody.
Everything.
Have a great
Bye.
holiday. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.